Hello there and welcome to the Bicycle Diaries and welcome to week 9 of my Mallorca training plan. So here we are, it's mid-March and I've got about 7.5 months before the big event down in Mallorca, and I've got about 5 weeks before I attempt to do my first 100 kilometre ride of the year. Now, if you're watching last week, you'll know that I thought the weather was going to improve and I was going to do about 150-160 kilometres out on the road this week. Well, long story short, that didn't happen. I was rather lazy, lack of motivation, and the weather was back to its old tricks again. So it was all very wet and it was very windy and it just wasn't very nice for cycling. So just a quick recap on the grand totals for the year so far. I've ridden 649 kilometres. I've got 29 hours and 45 minutes of seat time and I've climbed 3,868 metres. Now the week hasn't been a total disaster. I have managed to go out for 2 rides and one of them was quite long. On Friday I met up with James from Cardio Sport. Now he's the chap that I'm going to Mallorca with, and we did a 63 kilometre ride in the West Sussex countryside. So we started from a place called Horndean and we cycled out to a place called Chichester, and then we turned back on ourselves and rode back to Horndean again. All in all, that was 63 kilometres and it was a little bit tough in places, and mainly that was down to the weather. Firstly, a lot of the roads we were riding on were still flooded, and in places that was quite deep. In fact, it was up to my feet as they were on the pedals, so we had to take that a little bit carefully. And then when we got to Chichester and turned back for home, it was basically a 30 kilometre headwind, and that was pretty hard going. But to my surprise, it wasn't quite as hard as I thought it was going to be. I have to admit I was a little bit nervous when I planned the ride about doing that kind of distance. But once we were out on the road, everything was fine, and it was just that really difficult bit coming back where I just had to grip my teeth, almost kind of detach myself from my body and what I was feeling, just to keep the pedals turning and just see those kilometres tick down. Now the interesting thing was that when we got back to Horndean, James and I sat and we had a coffee in one of the local cafes, and up until that point I felt quite strong and quite kind of focused on getting to the top of the little climbs and little sections that I'd set myself. And we sat down, we had the coffee, and everything was fine. And then when I had to ride the last 2.5 kilometres home, it was absolutely really tough. It just goes to show how you kind of keep yourself strong mentally, and then once the reason to be strong has gone, then yeah, you feel it physically as well. And then on Sunday I went out and did a solo ride on the Edney's Lane route. Now if you don't know that route, it's not desperately long, it's only about 25 kilometres, but there are a couple of fairly longish climbs in there. So they're about 3 kilometres with about a 3 or 4% gradient. Normally when I'm feeling fit I can do that route in an hour. But yesterday I thought, well, I'll take it fairly easy because I don't think I'm fully recovered, and lo and behold, as I started the ride, I got about 4 or 5 kilometres in and I could really feel my legs start to feel a bit heavy. So that was a suggestion to me that perhaps I wasn't fully recovered from Friday's ride. And plus the weather was just absolutely awful. It was a lot colder than I imagined. It was only about 6 degrees Celsius and there was an absolutely amazingly strong wind. It was about 35 kilometres an hour, and at one point I was riding down from the Bat and Ball pub into the village of Hambledon. It's a long straight descent, but there was a block headwind and I was pedaling for all I was worth, and for all intents and purposes I was practically standing still because the wind was so strong. So that brings the totals for this week to 88 kilometers ridden, 4 hours of seat time and 765 meters climbed. And if we go over to Strava to have a look at the fitness scores, we can see that on the long ride on Friday I scored 42, and then yesterday my score was still 42. All in all, it's not been a super amazing week on the bike, but at least I wasn't sat around just twiddling my thumbs. I think the plan for next week is to try and actually go out and do that 150, 160 kilometers. The weather forecast for next week is looking kind of okay. The first half of the week isn't looking good, but then it's looking sort of reasonably dry and reasonably sunny for the second half of the week. So that's probably when I will attempt to go out and do some longer rides. I would like to keep pushing the distance up as well, so increasing it from 63 kilometers to say 65 or even 70 kilometers. And then if all else fails, I think I may have to implement a kind of a daily commute type plan. So for me, that would probably mean going out into the garage every morning before breakfast, before my day gets started, and doing maybe a 30-minute session on the turbo trainer. Obviously, the world at the moment is in chaos due to the coronavirus. Now, I'll be the first person to admit that I'm not a doctor and I'm not an expert in infectious diseases, so I don't really understand what's happening. All I do know is that many events around the world are being cancelled, and that's even extending to me. So for instance, the event that I was doing in early May with the Pyrenees.cc down in the south of France, that's all been postponed. Plus the Isle of Wight Randonnée, which is one of my big milestone events in early May as well. That's not cancelled just yet, but the organisers are looking at the situation and they will be making a decision a bit closer to the time. So if that does get cancelled, that will be very sad. But nevertheless, we can probably still go out and do a ride. So wherever you are in the world, take care of yourself and hopefully you'll be able to get out and do some cycling. Thanks for watching.